Hey there, it's Kate again. Do you want to start painting minifigures but are slightly unsure of how to exactly do it? Well, I will do my best at telling you everything I've learned so far, after only having painted 6 minifigures. To start off, I'll show you 2 minifigures that I've painted that I think turned out quite well and why. On this Cobalt mini, the first thing I want to do is block in the main colour, starting with the area with the largest surface, so the body of the dragon. As it's the first part I'm painting, it doesn't fully matter whether I get paint on areas I want to be a different colour later. One problem I've seen people have is the struggle to keep all bristles or brush together, which can create uneven lines and make your painting a bit less accurate. To stop this from happening, simply just dip your paintbrush most of the way into the paint and wipe off any excess. The saturation just acts as a way to bond the bristles together while you're painting. Sometimes deciding on what colours you want to use can be quite difficult, but there are ways to help you decide. One tool that you can use is the colour wheel. Complementary colours usually look good together, but also colours with a similar tone. Another more precise way you can decide on colours is just to take a picture of the figure and block in the colours on your phone using whatever sort of editing tool you can. Sometimes your paints will just be a little too watered down, so you'll end up having to use multiple layers. However, a way I've managed to bypass this problem is to cram in detail so you don't even notice anyways. You'll see it later. The order that you paint is quite important. Make sure to have every surface covered before you even start going into the little details so you can minimise any mistakes. The way I've sorted the good, the bad and the ugly minis into their respective classes is purely opinion based with a few exceptions. I think this Cobalt is good in particular because of the colour choices and the level of detail I was able to go into later. Not every mini you'll make you'll like. Now that every surface is painted, I can start going into details and touching up my mistakes that I made. Sometimes I use a technique called dry brushing, where I can wipe off most of the paint from my brush and stroke it on top of the surface to make texture. There is also a kind of opposite technique I use, where I really water down a much darker version of a colour, which can then sink into small cracks and the excess can be wiped off with my finger to create depth. I call this wet brushing, but I'm still kind of unsure on the name. Sounds a bit weird. For much smaller details like this, it is quite important to have enough paint on your paintbrush. It's okay not to always get things perfect on the first try. You can always go back and retouch them later. Again, I'm using my wet brush technique to get into the crevices between the scales. It's the small details like this that really bring minis to life. And don't just assume that shadows will do the work for you. At this point I've decided to add small dots all over the body to represent scales. I made these spots more condensed and also lighter on raised areas like the shoulders. Something important to understand is you don't always need to spend hours painting each individual detail like scales, but instead find ways to mimic that feeling. Sometimes it's more effective than the real thing as it brings in your own style. Not every mini needs to be super realistic. Here I'm dry brushing again. See that I don't wipe off all the paint, but most of it. Again, I'm using the spotty, scaly texture, focusing more on joints like the knees and tail. I'm using pretty much the same technique for the shirt to make it look more like fabric. Finally, once the main figure is complete, I just add a grassland area beneath it. It's important to think about what sort of setting the creature's in, although I sometimes forget and just slap them onto some grass. I think what makes this one of my favourites is the amount of detail I've crammed in. I always go by the more the merrier when it comes to that. Also, what comes into play here is that the figure itself is decent quality for its size. That's what has landed one of the minis into the ugly class. I do have 2 figures in the good section as opposed to one in the others. This was pure luck. Out of the 4, 2 of them I like. And that's really what matters, caring about what you like and not comparing yourself to the masters of figure painting. For this Spore Zombie, I kind of just went with my gut. I didn't plan it, and despite what I said earlier about planning, you don't always have to plan to come out with a good figure. I think what a lot of people try to do, which just ends up ruining their figures, is not using some sort of reference for at least the colour palette, especially beginners. It really is okay not to go completely outside of the box and paint it in a super special way. I'm not saying it can't be done, because you can pull it off, but if you're struggling and a beginner, you can just use references for help. When painting the mushrooms, I don't really take care. I just kind of make them a bit messy. It makes them look a little bit more organic. I do think possibly that someone might disagree with me for putting this one in the good category, especially when considering what the kobold look like. It's a little messy and random, however I do like it because it's fitting for what the character itself is. I also just like looking at it. You don't need to spend a lot of time on something for it to be good. I did end up having to use my grinder as there were some raised areas on the base. If you're having this problem, you just use sandpaper. For the base of this one, I kind of just wanted to make it look like he was in a cave. Dry brushing is actually an extremely effective technique when trying to make stone. I really like this one, just because it kind of represents exactly what I want it to look like in my mind. This next one, I consider it to be painted not as well as I wanted it to be. It's not to say I don't like it, there are definitely elements I do like about it, but it doesn't live up to my standards for myself. I go in straight with a mistake, painting the skin before I paint the dress, as it's the largest surface area. It doesn't really matter for this one, as they're quite similar in colour. Due to the white not covering well at all, I do later layer it up. This time I can't really get away with cramming details except for the shadows, as it's just a white dress. I think the main reason I didn't like this one much is because of not being able to put in too much detail, and it's a little bit messy as well. Just like the white, the skin colour was also quite transparent. Something I have struggled with is trying to get into the very small, tight, out-of-the-way areas. I think in the end you just need to turn it in every possible angle and try to be as careful as possible. Getting your hands on metallic paints like gold and silver can really add a nice touch of detail to your minis. Despite not liking this one much, I really do like the intricate design on the shield. To have clean lines, I kept my brush always saturated. Remember, you don't need to stay in the confines of painting exactly how the figure is. If you have a flat surface, like the shield for example, you can paint it with whatever pattern you like to give it more personality. Instead of wet brushing the shadows on in grey, I used silver by accident, but I don't actually mind how it looks. It looks pretty nice. I didn't really know what to do with the hair, so I stuck with the colour palette and painted it orange to match with the red. Another thing that throws me off with this one are the eyes. They look quite lifeless and I really just don't like how they look. Again, just like I did with Kobold, I wanted to do grassland for the base. It's not that bad, I just don't really like how it looks, but it could be worse. It's not that bad. Now for the ugly. This isn't entirely the same as the bad, but similar. The main difference is the quality of the figure itself paired with not so great painting. The problem is, a badly made, low poly figure can really demotivate you from painting expressively, as ultimately it still won't ever look perfect. There are ways to overcome this, like sanding down your figure, or just ignoring the fact that it's a bad quality figure and still painting really detailed anyways. I think sometimes, if you can, it's just best to spend that little bit more money just to get a better figure, because, I mean, this just isn't great, and from my experience, it kind of just takes away the fun of painting. Despite all of that, I still tried to paint it as well as I could. I used earthy colours, because that kind of represents what an ogre is, really. I used wet brushing again, and it made it look really dirty. I do actually really like how that came out, to be honest, even though I don't like the figure itself. In hindsight, I did go quite overboard with the wet brushing. I added these little speckly bits on the boots to make it look like fur. Similar to what I did on the Kobold earlier, I added these little spots all over the skin to act as rough bumps. Just like the one before, I don't mind how it looks, it just doesn't really fit what I wanted it to look like, really. And that's not my fault. Oh, I'm sticking by that, it's not my fault. And at the end of it all, they're done. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Don't always assume every figure you paint will be super amazing or super bad. It takes time and practice. You can never learn if you don't try. Thanks for sticking around, I hope you found this video useful, and if you enjoyed, consider liking the video. I don't usually do things like this as I'm a sculptor, but still, if you want to see some of that too, you can subscribe. Happy gaming, and make sure to have fun painting. Goodbye!